Hey guys, welcome to the Solar Slang Podcast. My name is Leith.
Yo, I'm Mr. Michael McDonald Jr.
And this podcast was made possible by A to Z Solar Services, working today to build a better tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. So what are we going to talk about today on this fantastic edition?
Well, there are some very important topics to cover today, Mike, and those topics consist of the new commercial line of modules that have been put out there today. Also, the issues found in systems after a few years of installation and how those issues originate. And also, the U.S. solar industry, how it's
Doing what it's doing. How it's producing, what it's adding, all that stuff. Isn't where we were talking about that the other day.
how much it's growing over the past years and what it's expected to do over the next couple years.
Right. So the first thing on that, you were talking about the bifacial modules.
Yeah.
The weird, strange new. They're not really that new. I guess
Well,
they've been around for a while.
It's not that the bifacial are new, it's that they're starting to put glass on both sides of the modules. And this is mostly for like ground mount, large megawatt
Right.
systems, commercial scale, utility scale projects.
It's got to be safer.
Well, yeah,
More-
I mean, just
yeah.
in the field, from what I've noticed,
Yeah.
is a lot of scratching on the backs of the modules. It's going to definitely help with that.
Yeah,
for sure.
especially like when you have 1,000 of them in a field. The
Yeah.
likelihood that some laborer or somebody that just simply isn't familiar with it is going to damage it is pretty crazy. You know, that's like a super weak point in a module, though.
Yeah,
You know, and I think they've always made them like that because it would be super. It's got to be a lot more expensive to put the tempered glass on both sides of it, which is insane.
I would always say I would say that's the most vulnerable part of the module would be the backside. Wouldn't you say so?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it's that's what's kind of crazy about the manufacturing of them. Since they've been around, since I've messed with them, it's always been like, oh yeah, they can stand a hurricane, a golf ball can hit them and be all right, but don't touch the back. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny that it's got like this weak point. But I do know that with the like the tempered glass, the aluminum frame, the cells, and everything like that, I think it was just a way to make them affordable. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's what I was going to say is
Yeah.
do you think that adding this secondary glass to the panel is going to make the price point go up a good bit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Also, when we're talking about bifacial, I mean, we're talking about modules that have production on both sides of the module, which means a longer manufacturing process, a more intense manufacturing process. Yeah, so that means a longer payback for the production, a longer, hopefully it's a better module, it's better made, but yeah, it's, I don't know if it's good yet. I guess time will tell if they last.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's the amount of utility scale projects we see coming up and came up this past year was a large amount. I know I heard of many just in the local area. That one in Franklinton is just huge, and they're adding on to it. It's a Entergy project, and they are creating a huge farm out there to feed back to help support the grid. You want to talk a little bit about energy, or you think we should stay away
Dude,
from
I don't know if somebody
stay positive, or
somebody
should we-
recently told us that we were negative last time, and if we start talking about energy, it's not going to be positive.
Yeah,
It's not
that's
gonna be.
true.
It's
Let's just stay
definitely
away
gonna be.
from Entergy.
But they, I'll give them props. Let me just try to give them props a little bit. If they are doing that field out there, and it does. Although most local people are like, I don't like it because I'd rather have a farm there, which probably carbon footprint wise, crops could capture carbon and all that. So there's many arguments both ways, but we'll give them credit because they are at least trying to adapt new technologies. A word on the bifacial modules though, PV is all about, the way it works is all about the light, and the heat is really not your friend. So the more dense you make a product, like the more actual density you have in it, the more it's going to hold and retain heat. So I can imagine that a bifacial module, I don't know if it'll last as long and the cells will be as healthy in there as a module that has this back, although it is kind of crazy and you can scratch it. It dissipates all that heat and all that stuff off that module. You know what I mean? Because it's such a thin layer. Now you trap that with another piece of glass, another, thin film bifacial module. You're going to retain some of that heat. So I don't think it's as simple to say that they'll outperform a conventional module.
Well, I guess just like any of the modules that we've seen hit the market over the past decade is it's going to have to be tested in the field.
Yeah,
you know, it's going to have
we'll
to,
see.
We'll have to see what happens over the first generation, second generation, third generation of these modules with double-sided glass. Bifacial isn't that new. It does help production, especially on ground mount systems. I don't see the need for them as much as for roof mounts. It actually might dissipate heat better on roof mounts not to have a bifacial module with double-sided glass. Mm-hmm. But I guess time will tell. But,
exactly. On the same note with talking about the other topics you were talking about, and this kind of relates to energy and larger fields, is the safety issues with larger field installations. Specifically, some of the numbers you were highlighting, like the faults that occur related to these installations. Like, they're not safe compared to traditional residential installs. What are some of those numbers? You know some of those numbers, the actual percentages of the failures and everything like that.
Yeah, so they say that 62% of inspections found is from safety issues such as overheating components or improperly installed equipment. 59% of all issues are related to wire management and field-made solar connectors, and 91% of critical major issues are in DC distributions.
91% of them.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's I would guess that would be modules going bad. Speaking of bifacial modules, so already even on the polymer backed modules, they have seen that 91% of the problems come from either the DC side, which is going to be the panel, or the crimp connectors that installers do on site. Just from our experience in the field, what do you think we find more? Honestly, I feel like it runs kind of a
parallel
tight race. You know?
Yeah, I would say that most of the time, only just because I guess most people are more experienced with AC production and not DC production, which we've all had in our houses for a really long time. Single phase AC. Usually the problem is not on that side because it's so redundant and safe, and we've learned so much about it. It's often not on the AC side. When we go up to a system, and the reason you need a solar dude and not just an electrician is because you simply have to know about that DC issue, because like all the numbers you just highlighted, and more than likely the production issue is going to be on your DC side and not your AC side. Now that being said, it still does happen with your AC equipment,
Yeah, so some ways to prevent these for homeowners out there and installers from future issues, callbacks to jobs, would be to quality and assurance and quality control when the install is done.
Right. To highlight some of those numbers you were talking about, the 91% of the production we say is on the DC side, but which is crazy. But part of that, breaking that down, related to the other numbers you said, like 62% are related to improperly installed equipment and components. 59% are related to the wire management. That is purely the guys doing it and the people doing it correctly. I think a lot of these issues, and this kind of ties into those large-scale arrays we were talking about, because if that's true and it's on the DC side, a lot of it's wire management on the DC side specifically, most of these large-scale utility-scale arrays are DC-based arrays. So most of what you see in the field...
Central inverters.
Yeah, and they're central inverters, they're larger inverters, they're utility-scale inverters, obviously, because they're so large, and they're high-voltage DC strings that you're looking at in those fields. And it doesn't turn into AC and become much safer, in my opinion, until it goes to a larger... So that being said, all those numbers you just highlighted, that means that the likelihood that a lot of those arrays are going to have issues related to the DC side, specifically the wire management, the wire crimps and those things, are high. It's higher. The likelihood of failure on a utility scale, because of all the DC staying out in the field, is higher. It's more likely to fail.
Well, what we've seen even on small scale is that these high voltage DC circuits are burning out cells in the modules, the solders inside of the modules if they're not strong, and if they weren't produced, at a quality controlled location.
Yeah, they're gone. They're not going to last. They simply aren't going to last for sure.
Yeah, a lot of it depends on the environment the product was produced in. Sometimes it has to be a very controlled environment so that these solders can be done properly and these cells can be set properly. Because even the smallest imperfection in the production side of these modules can cause issues down the line, and that can end up costing millions of dollars in the field. Because you got to think. All the different places some of these modules go are all across the world. So you see, call outs for systems that aren't producing, whether it be utility scale or residential.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's kind of crazy that I think you see most manufacturers. A lot of products we mess with now, like In-Phase, and even some of the DC strings that are lower. You see people kind of getting away from these giant, huge, on a house at least, high voltage strings. I think they ultimately, we don't really even understand what happens to these modules long term because they simply haven't been around long enough to know.
Well, I've seen a lot of these large manufacturers try to step into the solar game, and the solar industry just kind of kicks them out. They just try to produce, like for example, Dow tried to produce the solar shingle, and they went out of production shortly after. I think after about 7 years in the industry because they weren't effective in the field. They had a lot of warranty claims. They had a lot of recalls on the products, and they ended up having to pay out millions of dollars to make a lot of them right. And they were just like, okay, this is costing us more than we're making. LG, also another big player in the game that dropped out.
This panel right here, this one we're sitting at.
Yep, that's an LG module that came off of a system because
pooped out.
Yeah, supposedly the cold solders in them gave out, and they just didn't make it in the field, So, we see some really large companies trying to get into it, and the industry's just like, nope, not having it. Can't be in here,
Right, yeah, and I think all the reason, I'd say, like, well, what is the reason for that if I was trying to think about, well, why is it impossible to break into it? It is just, a cell and some aluminum and everything, but the quality of the work starts in the factory, in the place, in the manufacturing process. And it's just something that has, because we're trying to get so big so fast and like kind of outgrow, the whole thing, then the manufacturing lost. And you simply can't just break into this and think that you're going to manufacture these things and they're going to last. It's crazy. It's incredibly hard to make it, to get the laboratory, requirements for it to be a badass module that's going to last 25 years, Yeah. It's kind of crazy.
And that's just in the production side of the modules. Now, on the other side, what it's saying that a lot of these installers in the field making up the connections for the home runs for these high voltage DC circuits. Now, some weaknesses or vulnerabilities we've seen in these circuits has been the connectors. So, but there's two ways that these connectors have kind of shown faults and shown to give out over time. One, I feel, is buying cheap crimp heads. MC4s are what they're called. That's the norm in the solar industry. And when you buy cheap ones, when you buy them, you can kind of like click them in, and you can feel it. You can feel the
funky
quality in it, and it's just not it's not making it long term in the field. So it's that, you got that end of it, and then you have the actual installer that's doing it. It has to be crimped correctly. It has to be tightened down tight enough to keep any liquid from getting inside of there, and making sure that it's crimped at the right length that it should be. That wire has to be stripped at the right length. So you got to make sure you know how to use these crimps. Mike, not too long ago, bought some crimpers.
Here we go.
And not to hate on his crimpers, but there's a reason that you buy the expensive one.
Why would I, as a person, as who I am, buy crappy ones? Because I feel like I don't know the answer to that. Because you're an idiot? I don't know. But because I feel like I'm thorough enough to know what to look for if it's crimped right or wrong. You know what I mean? The good ones, it's almost impossible to do it bad if you were showed right how to do it. You know what I mean? The crappy ones, anybody can mess up with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I feel, but why would I take the chance and do something? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so
They
I would
work
say
fine.
just go ahead and buy the expensive crimpers.
Jesus.
All my installers out there, homeowners, make sure that your installers are being quality with all of their work, because that's where 90% of all of these problems come from, is going to be quality control when the system was installed. So you kind of have to check on things even as a homeowner when you're having these things installed. Like, hey, what's up with that wire? hanging down my roof right there? Or why are these pipes ran across my roof looking all goofy? And there's quality in all the work. So
right. And something else about it's just about knowing the materials too. I mean, if you do this for a while, like for instance, like a regular copper wire is not going to last as long as an annealed copper wire. There's instances where you need to do one of those things or the other, or if you interact with aluminum conductors and it's touching something else, there's a way to do that. There's a correct way to do that, and it's not extremely evident or obvious when you do it. You're like, it'll work for a while, but if there's some kind of galvanic reaction or dissimilar metals touching each other, in a couple of years, it's gonna be bad. And not only that, in a high voltage strings like that can cause fires. Yeah, because of the collection of heat that's happening. So,
well, Solar Power World, the article I was reading last night was saying the best way to prevent and to secure your investment and prevent any issues is to have a maintenance check every few years on these systems, even if it's not needed, just to have them checked up. They say one of the ways to check it is a thermal imaging camera to fly over on a drone just to see if there's any hot spots in the system. Right. Now, we don't use a thermal imaging drone. Sometimes we hire an Indian, and he comes and sticks his ear to the module like so.
And he listens. Yeah,
and he can hear any imperfections.
He's not cheap
in the
though.
System.
Yeah.
He's
that
good.
Dude's,
he's good. He's been doing solar since Christopher Columbus came.
Yeah, he gets that little pencil out and he writes those little symbols on the paper, and only he knows what they mean.
Yeah.
And then he looks in a hat to read it, and then I was like, okay, yeah, he's always right. He's never been wrong. Yeah. So that's crazy.
So either get an Indian or a thermal imaging camera. Yeah. Thermal imaging camera is easier to find though, just for our installers and homeowners out there.
Yeah, and that's like some basic old school electrical stuff. Some of that's like imaging camera stuff been used in motors and panels and all kind of stuff like that, and it's making its way to how we understand what's going on with solar panels. Most of those large scale arrays, what I know from the history is are a lot of faults and stuff simply aren't picked up because they're tiny, and the array is cranking out at a voltage that's really high and really powerful.
Pushing it right through.
It won't get noticed. But what's crazy about that, it doesn't suck really. I guess it's a good thing to make everything better. But Entergy and large-scale arrays, like the ones that they initially installed in California when solar took off again in the late 90s and then in the early 2000s, a lot of the things that we have to deal with as installers, like the fact that all of our inverters have arc fault protection on them. Before that, it was ground fault protection. Before that, it was just regular-ass circuit protection. And a lot of the way the modules are built, the way the inverters notify, the way the inverters grid connect, all of these things happen because somebody made boo-boos and they had to change it. And most of those mess-ups happened on some of these larger-scale arrays. So, it's not something that if you're a solar dude or even if you're a residential customer, you're not removed from it because you're connected to it in a way that whatever happens out there affects the whole solar game. So I guess sooner or later we're going to see bifacial modules, out there on residential stuff because they're essentially setting the tone for the rest of the industry. You know what I mean?
Well, if they get massively produced, then they'll be cheaper. Residential customers can afford them.
Right. In that way, we as smaller installers, even though we don't always mess with larger installs and we're just residential guys, we always have to keep an eye on these larger scale installations because they dictate the direction that the industry will go in. Because those companies that make all those modules, thousands and thousands and thousands on single jobs, they're going to be the ones that are going to be around because they're going to make all the money. Yeah. That's going to affect us, So it's something to definitely look at.
All right, just to look at what's happened over the past year in the solar industry and what we expect to come in the future. Statistics say the U.S. solar industry has added 6.5 gigawatts of new electric generating capacity in the quarter 3 of 2023, a 35% year-over-year increase as federal clean energy policies begin to take effect. What federal clean energy policies do you think that they're speaking about? The Inflation Reduction Act, the what's that grant that just hit? The REAP grant.
REAP grant, yeah. You're talking about specific. Yeah, if you're talking specifically about the recent surplus, like it says the the quarter you were saying in the recent, I would say, yeah, it's probably got a lot to do with that inflation reduction because a lot of the infrastructure stuff that they put in, they made it implicit that solar would be involved. You know what I mean? In other words, they were like, okay, if you're doing new construction over here, part of this has to be either sustainable in some kind of efficiency way or solar way. So yeah, I think that's opened up a lot of channels, for sure. You know, the government doesn't just invest in solar in our country. It also invests in solar in other countries, but not directly. Like instead of, they're not like installing panels in other countries and helping them like that. Other companies need financing to get solar. Like say like, I don't know, like Polynesia, that's not a real country. That's a place. But anyway, say the Philippines is like, hey, we want to put solar and we want to go utility scale solar, but we need the money to back it up. And they can borrow money at like 12%, but the U.S. can borrow money at like 4%. U.S. is like, yeah, we're going to co-sign that. We're going to give you that financing. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of that, we don't just invest in our world. You know, I think it's monetarily driven. Was the point I was getting at? Is that solar? I think is like not only are the policies, the infrastructure, the things, the clean policies that the government is making happen. I think people are realizing right now at this point, and probably the last couple of years, that it's a good investment. So a lot of money is jumping behind it, and that's pushing it. That's pushing people. You know what I mean?
Well, I've noticed a lot of the domestically produced products like Solarc and Enphase, which are produced in the United States, are being sent to these countries. I wonder if the government is financially backing the manufacturers to send these out and say, hey, we're going to back up this dollar amount. Maybe like the countries are buying bonds in the United States.
Yeah, it's like finance,
saying we're going to pay for this if you support this project out in the Philippines or wherever, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's definitely a thing. I believe that it's definitely a thing that's happening. And so what happens, I think what happens with that is we're flipping the script a little bit. Like Germany, Europe, China, a lot of people have dictated, like we might invent the technology here or we might be leaders in it, but the ones that do the manufacturing, that create all the products that are the good products, like SunPower as an example, which started in Germany, they've actually kind of dictated how the market went because they produced all this stuff. Now we have companies like Enphase, Solarc and stuff, even though some of the parts may be manufactured overseas and then assembled here. These are American-driven companies that'll help us drive the market and drive the price. And I think that has everything to do with the fact that the government wants to get in behind it and financial people want to get in behind it. Not because it's clean, not because it's green, but because it's a good money move. That it's a smart thing to invest in. It's almost like knowing about coal before trains took off or people needed coal to heat their homes. Like if you can get on the bottom floor of it, you know what I mean? It's a smart investment. And I think that is driving the economy. That's driving solar. It would be awesome if it was green, keep the earth clean, keep things sustainable. Let's do it like that. That is hopefully some people out there doing it for that. But the reason it's working right now and it hasn't gone anywhere with all the rebates disappearing is because people are like, wait, there's money in this. Yeah. And that's just simply how we are. We're capitalistic economy. It's got to be like that to work, you know.
Yeah, and just to go over some of the grants that are available right now, the REAP grant is one of the newest ones that we've kind of been looking into lately. And the way it works is it's put in place for smaller businesses in rural areas. A way to look into that is they have companies that write the grants for you, and they don't take a percentage until the system is sold and you're approved for the grant. So you could really just get it analyzed by them to see if you are eligible for these grants for a little bit of nothing or free, and only pay them if you receive the grant, which can save hundreds of thousands of dollars on the install. But that's something to look into. They have a lot of underwriting companies that's contacted me and said, hey, we'll write these grants for your customers. We'll analyze their scenario and see if they're eligible for this funding. So that is a way to get into saving some money using some of these
clean energy policies you're talking about. Yeah, the REAP grant is It's something that's really interesting that is for. But no, that REAP grant is something that if you have less than 12,000 citizens in your area, I believe that most businesses in Louisiana qualify that unless you're in the major Baton Rouge area or New Orleans area. So that's something that's super cool. I think it's like 80% or something like that.
Yeah, most areas do qualify.
Why would the government do that?
What areas don't qualify?
Baton Rouge and New Orleans area.
Like in the city.
The major metro area of Baton Rouge, New Orleans. There's probably some places like up in West Monroe or Monroe. Or
Chicago, New York.
Chicago doesn't qualify, but I bet outside of Chicago does. Little small towns. Yeah, like, let me think of one.
Chicago metropolitan area.
Yeah, that's fun to say. A bunch. But yeah, why would the government do that? Why would the government support all that crap? Like, why do you think that the government would be like, hey, let's pay for all this money to make all these people do that? Why would that? How would the government make money on that move?
NATO.
That doesn't make any friggin' sense. But I mean, if they're gonna, so if the government, if you put into the people's hands, they're the ones that are the arbiters of their own infrastructure. They have to support their own grid and everything like that. And you give them, the government supports a whole bunch of money for the people to do that essentially. And to shore up their business and their ability to produce their own power. Then when that, years later, let's say they didn't do that. Years later, if the infrastructure failed, if the power line went down, or if the water wasn't working or something like that, the utilities that would come in, your Entergys and your Clecos and your Atmoses and all that, they'll come in and do it and they'll make the money and they'll charge you. But guess what? The government's going to have to subsidize them to do it. Because if that stuff fails, then it's going to be a major project. They're not going to be able to move all that money quick and do that. The government would have to subsidize it. They'd have to gain their money over a long time in an investment. So the government says, hey, you know what? We can see that getting people to care about their own power and produce their own things actually affects the bottom line, means the government long-term spends less money to help you out. You know what I mean? Because you're helping yourself out.
Well, the reason I say NATO is because didn't we sign a Carbon Reduction Act with NATO, so all NATO countries have to reduce their carbon emissions by a certain percentage by 2050?
I believe there's a couple of I think you're right. I think there is something that some kind of world organization. I'm sure there's another like a French something accord. I don't know what it is, where countries come together and agree that they're going to do these things. But the real big thing is that we should be supporting countries that are not in that, like countries that are crappy, have no infrastructure. They've never even had a chance to set up normal ass power. Like they've never had a chance to set up normal power, and now we're telling them to get expensive ass solar. They're like, hold on a minute. We didn't have the regular stuff yet. You know what I mean? That's not fair to them, especially if the regular shit is cheaper. So I think the government should be involved, and it should affect it should be something that everybody can make money on. Like it could be a win-win where we sell our products to these people at an affordable rate or a discounted rate and help them set up their infrastructure as green. A good example of this, which is kind of fucked up, is Puerto Rico, and that's not even another country. That's our country. We should be setting up shit there for them, and we should be giving it to them.
I think there are some large utility scale projects going on there, and also in Haiti.
They're all privately
another area that's been focused on by the United States, was to start backing their grid with renewables, regardless of what type of renewable that is. But yeah, just to go over some of the numbers, as a result of the growth, the United States is expected to add a record 33 gigawatts of solar capacity in 2023. According to the U.S. Solar Marketing Insights Q4 of 2023 report released today by the Solar Energy Industries Association and Wood Mackenzie, while economic challenges are beginning to affect the solar and storage industry, by 2050, solar is expected to be the largest source of generating capacity on the U.S. grid. That's big to think about. That's
Well, that is kind of what you just said about the NATO thing about 2050. Now, I'm not 100% sure on that, so I'm not going to comment on it. But I know that a lot of our initial drive in solar, like 2008. With different administrations and stuff, even before Biden, even though he was involved in that with the other administration, they all made promises related to a timeline. They all said, by this time, 2030, this much. By this day, this much. Now, whether that happens, we'll see. Because also what's happening, what's tracking with that, is our demand. We're not we're using more and more and more. So
well,
there's that.
Let me say this, being that you said that is also, we kind of covered this on one of our recent podcasts, that is up to the public to hold these politicians to their promises. Of course, they're going to say whatever they need to say to get into office, but as the masses, we have to hold them to whatever they say. So.
Right. So something else that we're talking like broadly about the federal government and about like assistance, whether it be from a state, like the state, not the federal government, but I think it's better if it was our state and our individual local municipalities, or say your state. So, for instance, when we had rebates, the 50% of it was paid for by the state, and that was a credit. That wasn't. That was was really the big seller of it. The federal never went anywhere, but they were taking on a bigger chunk of it. And even if your state didn't do it, local municipalities could be doing it. Like, for instance, we're in Mandeville, Louisiana, about 30 miles north of New Orleans. If they decided, hey, the utility doesn't offer this, Mandeville could say, hey, let's start a fund, and every month we'll give one person solar. They could be doing that. And so rebates don't just come from the federal government. And I think they actually work better when they're locally driven or state driven from the individual state. And you can prove that with like what California's done. California has set the standard for how solar can be applied. Now, they've done some stupid stuff recently and had bad financing and companies like what we deal with, where jobs weren't done. But they showed that a state can drive its policy with energy. They don't have to wait on the federal government to say, hey, we're going to make all these promises. Chicago, you said something about Chicago, Illinois being silly earlier. Chicago, the city, I believe, because it's a large-ass fucking city, one of the third biggest cities in the United States, has said, hey, we're going to do it. You know what I mean? They're not waiting on somebody to say,
not
hey.
even the state, city.
The actual city. Right. Now, and you do see that in a lot of places that really, truly, in my opinion, these are the places that really care about their own, about solar, about their own individual sustainability and long-term stuff. Like, there's places in Colorado where the local rebate for solar has nothing to do with the state or the federal government. It's actually the town that has money that they give you for solar, because they know you're helping. So hopefully we'll see more like that, more stuff like that happen as it goes, Yeah. So it won't just have to be the federal government to set the tone, It'd be awesome.
Yeah, well, we're kind of out of time for today, guys. We appreciate anybody that's tuning in. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please go down in the comments section and leave a comment. You have any questions, please let us know. And just any type of feedback. And hit subscribe if you can. This show was made possible by A to Z Solar Services, working today to build a better tomorrow. I'm Daddy Donut.
I'm Mike, and I've been here with Daddy Donut. Didn't even get no donuts. Where are the donuts?
And this is the Solar Sling Podcast. Woo! Don't put solar where the sun don't shine.
Okay. So it's like a private thing.